Chapter 1. The Forgotten One. They all believed my grandmother had nothing left. Just a fragile old woman I cared for while the rest of my family laughed at me for wasting my life. But hidden in her leather-bound diary was a crest, a trust created in 1947, and proof of a fortune worth millions, the kind of secret that could shatter everything my relatives thought they owned. From that moment on, every sneer, every whisper, every betrayal turned into a battle I could not avoid. I turned 36 last fall, but to my family I was still the woman who never quite lived up to expectations. I ran a used bookstore on a quiet street in Portland, a place filled with the smell of old paper and the comfort of quiet afternoons. It did not impress my relatives who measured worth in promotions, houses in the suburbs, and vacation photos posted online. What they never saw was the life I chose to live, one that kept me close to my grandmother Margaret. She had been the center of my world for as long as I could remember, especially in the last few years as her health declined. Born in 1942, she had taught high school English until retirement. By the time she turned 81, she was frail, needing help with almost everything, and most of the family had written her off as a burden. I refused to leave her side. That choice branded me as the family disappointment. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories. The living room buzzed that evening with forced laughter and the clinking of wine glasses. My uncle's house smelled of catered food and perfume. They were celebrating Margaret's birthday, though she barely had the strength to sit upright. She smiled faintly in her chair, her thin hands folded over the shawl I had draped across her shoulders. I stayed close, adjusting the pillows behind her back, making sure she sipped water. The others barely glanced at her. They were more interested in each other, in comparing salaries and investments. Richard, my cousin who had become a real estate attorney, leaned back in his chair with a smirk that had always made me bristle. He had a way of speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear, as if he were presenting evidence in court. He turned his attention to me. "Evelyn, still at that little bookstore?" He let the words hang like an insult. "How many customers does a place like that get? 5 a week?" The laughter that followed was sharp, not kind. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, but I kept my eyes on Margaret. Caroline, his wife, chimed in with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "At least she has something to keep her busy, though really it is more like a hobby. Some people just never grow up." She tilted her head as if she were pitying me, though the edge in her voice was cutting. I wanted to respond, to defend the hours I spent cataloging books, talking with customers who found meaning in the stories I sold, but I swallowed the words. Margaret shifted slightly, her fingers brushing mine. I held her hand and drew strength from that small gesture. Barbara, my mother, sat across the table. She stirred her coffee slowly, eyes downcast. She said nothing. That silence hurt more than Richard's smirk or Caroline's sneer. My mother had always been cautious, careful not to upset the balance. But in moments like this, her lack of defense felt like betrayal. I searched her face for some sign of support, but she avoided my gaze. The conversation turned again to property and stocks, each cousin trying to outdo the other. Margaret coughed softly, a sound that was ignored by most. I reached for her water glass and lifted it gently to her lips. She drank, her eyes never leaving mine. For a moment, I saw gratitude, even pride, in the way she looked at me. It was enough to steady my shaking hands. Later, when the candles were brought out, the family sang in a chorus that was more performance than affection. Margaret closed her eyes, her lips barely moving with the words. I leaned close, whispering encouragement, helping her blow out the flames. Applause filled the room, but the noise felt hollow. Plates of cake were passed around, and again the family retreated into their small groups, barely acknowledging the woman whose life they claimed to celebrate. As the evening wore on, Margaret grew tired. I wheeled her into the quieter den where the noise of the party dulled. She squeezed my hand with surprising strength. Her voice was thin but clear. "Do not believe what they say. Trust what you see." The words startled me. I leaned closer, asking her to repeat herself, but she only shook her head slightly, closing her eyes. I sat with her in the dim light, my heart heavy with questions. She had always been private about her past, careful with her words. I wondered what truth she wanted me to find. When I returned briefly to the dining room, Richard was in the middle of another story about a client he had outsmarted in court. Caroline laughed too loudly, and my mother nodded absently. I stood there unseen, as if invisible among them. My place was back with Margaret, and that was where I belonged. I slipped away before anyone noticed, settling again in the den. She was dozing now, her breathing shallow but even. I brushed a strand of gray hair from her forehead, feeling the weight of her earlier words echo inside me. Trust what you see. I did not yet know what she meant, but in that moment I promised myself I would not forget. The night ended quietly. Family members gathered coats and purses, kissed the air near Margaret's cheek without meeting her eyes, and drifted away into the cold Portland evening. I remained tidying the cups and plates, watching my grandmother sleep. The house grew silent, and the loneliness pressed in. I had felt it before, but never this sharply. Still, I reminded myself, I had chosen this. I had chosen her. As I turned off the last light, her whispered words lingered, pulling at a corner of my mind like the beginning of a secret waiting to be revealed. Chapter 2. The final days, the following morning, began the way so many mornings had in recent months, with the quiet shuffle of my feet across the hardwood floor, toward the small kitchen where Margaret's pill organizer sat on the counter. The sunlight filtered weakly through the blinds, and I measured out her medications with a practiced hand. The bottles rattled softly, each sound a reminder of her fragility. I carried the tray to her room, pausing to listen before I entered. Her breathing was shallow but steady, a rhythm I had learned to trust and fear at the same time. "Grandma, time for your medicine," I whispered gently. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open for a moment. "Evelyn, you are always here?" she murmured. "Always," I answered, sliding the pills into her palm and guiding her glass of water. She swallowed slowly, then drifted back against the pillows. I tucked the blanket around her thin shoulders, telling myself she would gain strength if I kept at it. The rest of the family rarely came by. When they did, it was brief and perfunctory, always with the same excuse about long hours at the firm or business trips they could not cancel. One afternoon, I caught Caroline standing in the doorway, her designer coat still on her shoulders. She looked around the modest room with faint distaste. "You must be exhausted doing this every day," she said. "Maybe a facility would be better. She deserves professional care." I straightened, my voice calm but firm. "She deserves family." Caroline's lips tightened and she left without responding. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories. The paperwork consumed as much of me as the caregiving itself. Medicare forms arrived in the mail, dense with language that twisted like vines. I sat at the dining table late into the night, sorting through hospital bills, prescription refills, and insurance statements. Each signature felt like a promise I was keeping for Margaret. Sometimes my mother would call, her tone clipped. "Evelyn, are you sure you can handle all of this? You have no idea how complicated those forms can be." I would breathe slowly before answering. "I am handling it. Someone has to." The silence on the other end was telling. She wanted me to admit weakness, but I would not. Margaret had moments of startling clarity that cut through the haze of her illness. One afternoon while I helped her sip broth, she gripped my wrist with surprising strength. Her eyes were sharp, almost fierce. "Only you will understand. Find the truth." I blinked, startled. "What truth, Grandma?" She shook her head, her breath rattling. "Not yet." Her grip loosened, and she sank back into her pillows. I sat there long after, the words circling in my mind. Exhaustion became my constant companion. Nights were broken by her calls, sometimes just whispers of my name when she was afraid. I would sit on the edge of her bed, stroking her hand until she calmed. The rest of the house was silent, the tick of the clock in the hallway loud in the stillness. I cried quietly once, my tears slipping onto the blanket. Her breathing grew weaker, and the sound twisted my chest with fear. But even through the tears, I promised myself I would not falter. Richard stopped by once, standing awkwardly in the doorway. He glanced at his watch more than at Margaret. "Evelyn, you cannot keep doing this. It will break you." I kept my eyes on her as I adjusted her oxygen tube. "Then who will?" He had no answer. He muttered something about court deadlines and left as quickly as he came. His absence was louder than his words. At times, Margaret would surprise me with fragments of memory. She told me about teaching high school in the 60s, about the smell of chalk dust and the sound of teenagers slamming lockers. Her face would soften when she spoke, and for a few minutes, I could see the vibrant woman she once was. Then the fog would return, and she would fall silent again. I treasured those brief windows as gifts. One evening, I prepared her medication while the house settled into quiet. The lamp beside her bed cast a soft glow over her face. She opened her eyes as I adjusted her pillow. "Evelyn," she whispered, "you must not let them decide for you. Promise me." I leaned close, my throat tight. "I promise, Grandma." She closed her eyes again, and I sat there, holding her hand until her breathing steadied. The nights were the hardest. I would sit in the armchair by her bed, listening for any change in her breathing. Some nights I dozed with the sound of the oxygen machine humming beside me. Other nights I lay awake, my mind racing with her cryptic words. "Only you will understand. Find the truth." The phrase looped in my head, leaving me restless. One late night, the house felt especially heavy. Margaret's breaths were shallow, each one like the fragile flicker of a candle. I pressed my hands over my face, the weight of weeks and months pressing down. The tears came hot and fast, and I could not stop them. I cried quietly, shoulders shaking, the sound lost in the hum of the machine. After a long while, I wiped my face and leaned closer to listen to her faint breaths. The fragility of it terrified me, but I sat straighter, wiping the last of my tears away. I had promised her, no matter what they said, no matter how alone I felt, I would not leave her. The clock struck midnight, and the house was utterly still. Margaret slept, her chest rising and falling like a tide pulled by some distant force. I sat in silence, my body aching with fatigue, my heart heavy but resolute. But whatever truth she carried, whatever secret she wanted me to find, I would be ready. For now, I listened to her breathing, counting each fragile rise and fall, determined to stay until the morning came. Chapter 3. The Mysterious Heirloom. The morning came with a silence that felt heavier than usual. A week later, my grandmother was gone, and the house seemed to exhale without her in it. The funeral was held on a gray afternoon at a church near downtown Portland. The air smelled faintly of wet leaves, and the pews creaked as relatives shifted uncomfortably. Their voices were hushed, not with grief, but with calculation. After the service, I stood near the casket, my hand resting on the wood, while clusters of cousins whispered among themselves. I heard Caroline's voice cutting through the murmurs. "She didn't leave much behind, did she? Maybe some old jewelry. I suppose Evelyn will know since she was always around." Richard chuckled, adjusting his tie. "If there's anything worth dividing, we should do it properly. No sense in letting her play favorites." I turned sharply, my jaw tight, but Barbara touched my arm gently. "Not now," she whispered. Her eyes were tired, her grief hidden under layers of unease. Later that evening, I returned to the house, the same house where Margaret had spent her last days. The rooms were still, shadows lingering in corners. The scent of her lavender lotion clung to the blankets. I began to gather her belongings, folding sweaters, stacking old books, trying to make order out of the chaos she left behind. In the top drawer of her nightstand, I found a small box of trinkets, faded photographs, and letters bound with string. Beneath them, tucked away as if it had been waiting for me, was a leather-bound journal. The cover was cracked with age, its edges worn smooth by hands that had opened it countless times. My fingers traced the embossing on the front where two words stood out clearly. Trust, 1947. Below it was a crest I did not recognize, an intricate emblem pressed deep into the leather. I sat on the bed, the journal heavy in my hands. My heart pounded as I opened it carefully. The pages smelled faintly of dust and ink. At first, it seemed like ordinary reflections, notes about daily life, fragments of memory. But as I turned the pages, I noticed references to accounts, deeds, and family names I had never heard before. Margaret had written in a firm, deliberate script, even as her health declined. I whispered to myself, "What were you trying to tell me, Grandma?" A knock startled me. Barbara stood in the doorway, her arms crossed. "What are you doing in here?" "Cleaning up," I answered, sliding the journal partly under a sweater. She eyed me suspiciously. "Don't take on too much. The family will want to go through her things together." "I know," I said quietly. "I'll make sure everything important is kept safe." When she left, I pulled the journal back out, my pulse racing. I flipped through page after page until a section stopped me cold. Margaret had written about a trust established in 1947, long before I was born, tied to property in Oregon. The crest matched the emblem stamped on the cover. My hands shook as I read her words, vague but unmistakable, describing assets meant to be passed down, assets hidden from most of the family. The night deepened, and I carried the journal to my desk in the small study. My laptop glowed in the darkness as I carefully scanned every page, uploading them to a secure folder. I could not risk losing them. When the final page appeared on the screen, I sat back and stared at the digital images, overwhelmed. I picked up my phone and dialed Daniel, my oldest friend who had become an attorney. He answered groggily, his voice thick with sleep. "Evelyn, it's almost midnight." "What's wrong?" "I found something," I said, my voice low but urgent. "It's a journal. My grandmother's. It talks about a trust from 1947. There are names, dates, and some kind of crest. I scanned everything. I need you to look at it." He was silent for a moment. "A trust? Are you sure?" "Yes. I don't know what it means yet, but it feels important. I think she wanted me to find it." "Send me the scans," he said firmly, his voice sharpening. "I'll go through them first thing in the morning. Don't tell anyone else yet. I won't." I ended the call, my hands trembling. The journal sat open on the desk, a page marked with underlined words. "Protect what is ours, even when others turn away." The next day, I sat quietly as the family gathered again at the house. Richard walked through the rooms like a surveyor, commenting on furniture and paintings. Caroline picked up a porcelain vase, turning it over in her hands with obvious interest. Barbara tried to keep order. "Let's be fair. We can divide what is sentimental first, then discuss anything of value." Richard smirked. "Fairness is relative, isn't it?" He glanced at me pointedly. I said nothing, clutching a box of Margaret's scarves to my chest. My mind was elsewhere, on the journal hidden safely in my bag, on the words I had read, and the secrets that now pulsed like a heartbeat under the surface of our family. That night, alone again, I opened the journal to a passage near the middle. Margaret had written in a careful hand about the day she was entrusted with documents and keys, about promises she made to protect something larger than herself. My chest tightened as I realized she had carried this burden for decades, never telling anyone but leaving the trail for me. Her words revealed more than memories. They revealed a truth that could reshape everything we thought we knew about our family. And in that moment, I understood why she had always clutched my hand and whispered for me to trust what I saw. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories. Chapter 4. The Seed of Suspicion. The days after the funeral passed in a blur, but the weight of the journal never left my mind. I kept it locked in my bag, checking more often than I cared to admit that it was still there. One afternoon, while I stepped out to pick up groceries, I made the mistake of leaving my bag in the living room. When I returned, Caroline was standing near the couch, her fingers flipping quickly through the leather-bound pages. "What are you doing?" I demanded, dropping the paper bags onto the floor. She jumped, her eyes wide for a second before narrowing into a smirk. "Relax, Evelyn. I was just curious. You hide things so poorly." I strode across the room, snatching the journal from her hands. "This isn't yours to touch." Caroline tilted her head, her tone dripping with mock sympathy. "You really think Grandma left you something important, don't you? You think she trusted you with secrets worth anything?" My chest tightened. She did trust me. She trusted me because I was here when no one else was. She gave a laugh that was sharper than glass. "You sound delusional. I'll make sure the rest of the family hears about this little fantasy of yours." By the end of that week, the whispers had spread. At dinner gatherings and over hurried phone calls, the story was retold with added venom. Evelyn believes there is treasure. Evelyn is inventing stories about trusts and fortunes. Evelyn is obsessed with a diary. Each time I caught fragments of the gossip, my stomach twisted. It was Richard who finally confronted me directly. He showed up unannounced at the house, his shoes clicking against the floor as if he owned the place. I met him in the kitchen, the journal already hidden away. He leaned across the counter, his voice low but sharp. "Caroline tells me you've been spinning tales. A trust from the 1940s? A crest? Do you even hear yourself?" "I hear myself perfectly," I said, forcing my voice steady. "And I have the evidence." His eyes flashed. "Whatever you think you have, it will not matter. Do you understand? We will not let you keep it to yourself. If you try, you'll regret it." I stared back at him, the fear tightening my throat, but I refused to look away. "Then we'll see what the truth actually is." He straightened, adjusting his suit jacket as if preparing to leave a courtroom. "You are making a mistake. We won't let you win." He walked out, the slam of the door rattling through the house. That night I called Naomi, my cousin who worked as a history professor at Oregon State University. She had always been kinder than the rest, someone who cared about facts more than appearances. When I told her about the crest on the journal, she agreed to look at the scans. A few days later, she called back, her voice alive with excitement. "Evelyn, this is significant. The crest matches one used by a European family that immigrated here after the war. They were known for holding land deeds and assets in trust. It's not just decoration. It's a legitimate marker of ownership." I sank into a chair, gripping the phone tighter. "So it's real. It's very real," she confirmed. "And if Grandma had documents tying us to them, you might be sitting on something important. But be careful. Families fracture over things like this." I thanked her, my heart racing. After we hung up, I felt the world tilt slightly. It was no longer just my belief against their scorn. There was proof, faint but undeniable. 2 mornings later, I received an unexpected call. The voice on the other end introduced herself as Emily Sanders, a reporter for the Portland Chronicle. "Ms. Marlowe, I've heard rumors about a family trust linked to your grandmother's estate. I was hoping to ask a few questions." The blood drained from my face. "Where did you hear that?" She chuckled lightly. "Whispers travel fast. Your relatives are not very discreet. I'd like to give you a chance to tell your side before something inaccurate ends up in print." I gripped the phone, torn between slamming it down and spilling everything. "There's nothing I want to comment on right now," I said finally. "This is private." "I understand," Emily replied, her tone surprisingly gentle. "But if you change your mind, I'll be here." When I hung up, I felt the ground beneath me shift again. It was no longer a family squabble. The outside world had begun to take notice. That evening, the family gathered again, this time in Barbara's dining room. The air was thick with tension, the clink of silverware too sharp. Richard leaned forward across the table, his eyes locked on mine. "Are you ready to admit you've been lying?" he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. I set down my fork, my hands trembling slightly, but my voice clear. "I am not lying. Grandma left behind her words, and I will not let them be twisted." Caroline scoffed. "You are humiliating yourself. Can't you see how pathetic this looks?" For the first time in my life, I raised my voice at them. What looks pathetic is ignoring the truth because it doesn't fit your version of the family. I was here when she needed someone. I will honor her, even if it means standing alone. The room fell silent, the weight of my words hanging heavy. Richard's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Barbara stared at her plate, refusing to lift her eyes. In that silence, I realized something had shifted. They might keep mocking, they might keep plotting, but I had planted a seed of doubt among them. And I had finally found the strength to declare I would see this through, no matter what it cost me. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories. Chapter 5. The Divided Family. The family summoned me to Barbara's house on a Saturday afternoon, calling it a meeting, but arranging the living room like a courtroom. Chairs were set in a stiff circle, the air heavy with unspoken accusations. Richard sat forward in his suit, papers stacked neatly beside him, as if he had prepared opening arguments. Caroline crossed her legs with deliberate sharpness, her eyes glittering with hostility. I held the leather-bound journal in my lap, unwilling to leave it behind. Richard's voice cut through the silence. "Let's stop pretending. That book is not yours alone. Hand it over and we can review it together, fairly." I pressed the journal closer against me. "Grandma gave this to me." Her words are clear. She wanted me to have it. Caroline leaned forward, her voice dripping with contempt. You think you are special because you sat at her bedside. You are clinging to an old woman's scribbles and turning it into a fortune that does not exist. I opened my mouth to answer, but before I could, Thomas, my brother, stood and reached for the journal. Maybe we should all take a look right now, he said. His hand closed on the cover, trying to yank it from me. The leather creaked under the strain. Stop! I shouted, my voice breaking. But he pulled harder, the room erupting into noise. The door burst open just then, and Daniel stepped inside. He had come at my request, sensing this would not be a safe gathering. His voice was calm but firm. Put it down, Thomas. That journal is evidence now. Touching it in this way compromises its integrity. Thomas froze, his hand slipping away. Richard's expression soured. Evidence? Daniel walked to my side, his presence steadying me. Yes, Evelyn has already scanned every page. I filed an affidavit yesterday to establish chain of custody. If anyone tries to destroy or tamper with this journal, it will be considered obstruction. Caroline laughed bitterly. Obstruction? You sound ridiculous. Daniel's eyes narrowed. Not at all. A trust dating back to 1947 is a matter of property law. If this journal contains details of ownership, it is a legal document, and you all know it. The room went quiet, the weight of his words pressing down. Richard leaned back, but his jaw clenched. Fine, he muttered. Then I will hire my own counsel. You will not get away with keeping everything for yourself. I felt the blood drain from my face. So this is what it comes to. You would rather tear the family apart than consider that Grandma chose me for a reason. Richard pointed at me, his voice rising. She was senile. You manipulated her. My breath caught, but Daniel stepped forward. Careful. Defamation is not going to help you. If you want to fight this, you fight it in court. Later that week, as I worked at my bookstore, Emily Sanders appeared at the counter. She wore a neutral jacket, a notebook tucked under her arm. Evelyn, may I have a moment? She asked gently. I told you before I don't want to comment, I said, stacking a pile of used novels with trembling hands. She lowered her voice. The story is spreading. People are already talking. Wouldn't you rather control the narrative than let your relatives distort it? I shook my head. This is private. I won't feed the gossip. Her eyes searched mine for a moment, then she nodded. I respect that. But be careful. Secrets have a way of surfacing, whether we want them to or not. When she left, the bell over the door jingled with a sound that felt ominous. I sat down heavily behind the counter, the journal locked in the safe beneath my desk. That night, Daniel called, his voice steady but serious. I need you to keep the original journal secure. Do not let anyone touch it. I've filed the affidavit and backed up the scans with time-stamped certifications. The chain of custody is in place, but if they get their hands on the original, they could claim tampering. I swallowed hard. They already tried today. Thomas almost ripped it from me. Then you understand the danger, he said firmly. Keep it locked and tell me immediately if anything happens. This is bigger than family squabbles now. I stared at the journal resting on the desk, its worn leather cover gleaming faintly in the lamplight. For the first time, I truly felt the weight of what I was holding, not just paper and ink, but the power to divide or define everything our family believed about itself. And in the silence of that night, I realized how quickly the people I once trusted could become my enemies. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories. Chapter 6: The Hidden Bloodline. The phone rang early the next morning, and I saw Naomi's name on the screen. I answered quickly, my voice still rough from sleep. I have something for you, she said, excitement in her tone. I ran the crest through archival databases at the university. It matches a family that settled in Oregon in the late 1940s. They were European immigrants, connected to trusts established before they came here. The documents are solid, Evelyn. Your grandmother was protecting a lineage. I sat up straighter, clutching the phone. So it's real. She wasn't imagining any of it. No, she wasn't. And with the notes in that journal, you can connect the dots. But you'll need more than my word to fight them in court. I'll take whatever you can find, I told her. Later that afternoon, Daniel called me into his office downtown. His desk was covered in folders, and on top lay a sealed envelope. "I had the DNA test expedited," he explained. "We compared your sample with the preserved medical records from Margaret. The results confirm you are her direct maternal heir. That matters because the trust language specifies inheritance through her line." I held the paper with shaking hands. "They will hate me for this." "They already do," Daniel said plainly. "But this gives us leverage. We are filing a petition for beneficiary recognition and quiet title on the property. I am also seeking a temporary restraining order to prevent your cousins from interfering until the court rules." My head spun as I tried to process the shift. Just weeks ago, I was alone caring for a dying woman. Now I was standing at the edge of a legal storm with documents that could change everything. That evening, Harper, my 16-year-old niece, came by the bookstore with a shoebox under her arm. She looked nervous but determined. "Aunt Evelyn," she whispered, glancing toward the door, "I found this in a drawer at Grandma's old house." Dad was about to throw it away. She opened the box to reveal a faded black and white photograph of Margaret as a young woman. Around her neck hung a pendant bearing the same crest from the journal. My breath caught. "Harper, this is exactly what I needed." This proves she wore the symbol, that it was part of her identity. She smiled shyly. "I thought it looked important. I don't want to be like the others." "I believe you." I hugged her tightly, fighting back tears. "Thank you. You have no idea how much this means." 2 nights later, everything changed again. I locked up the bookstore as usual and walked home through the cool Portland air. When I returned the next morning, the front door hung slightly open. My stomach dropped. Inside, shelves were knocked askew, boxes overturned, papers scattered. The safe behind the counter stood open, its contents dumped onto the floor. I rushed forward, heart pounding. The journal was gone. For a moment, I could not breathe. Then I remembered the scans on my laptop and the encrypted copies Daniel had already submitted. The original was missing, but the evidence was not lost. I called him immediately. They broke in. "The journal is gone." "Are you safe?" he asked sharply. "Yes, but the store is a mess. Listen to me carefully. The affidavit and scans are already filed. The chain of custody is intact. The original is important, but it is not essential anymore. I will add the break-in report to our filings. You need to file a police report immediately." I nodded, even though he could not see me. "I feel like someone is watching me, Daniel. This is more than family now." "I know," he said, his tone firm, "which is why I'm filing the TRO today. They will not touch you again without legal consequences. Stay cautious, Evelyn. Keep your phone with you at all times." That night, after the police left, I sat in the darkened shop with the faint smell of dust and broken wood around me. My reflection stared back from the window, pale and tired but unbroken. The photograph of Margaret with her pendant lay safe in my bag, along with the DNA results and Naomi's research. A car idled outside longer than necessary, its headlights washing across the storefront before moving on. I felt the weight of unseen eyes and my pulse quickened. I whispered to myself, "You wanted me to find the truth, Grandma. I will not stop now, no matter how dangerous it becomes." The stakes had risen, the proof was mounting, and for the first time, I understood that what I carried was not just an inheritance, but a target. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories. Chapter 7. The Final Confrontation. The morning of the hearing arrived gray and damp, the kind of Portland morning where the mist clings to every surface. I walked up the stone steps of the Multnomah County Courthouse with Daniel beside me, my stomach tight but my head held high. Inside the courtroom, the air was heavy with the smell of polished wood and old paper. Richard sat at the plaintiff's table in a dark suit, his posture sharp and self-assured. Caroline leaned close to him, whispering with a look of triumph. The judge entered, and everyone rose. When we were seated again, Richard wasted no time. He stood, his voice loud and commanding. "Your Honor, my cousin Evelyn has fabricated claims of ownership based on the scribblings of an elderly woman. We will show that she manipulated Margaret Hale in her final days to gain access to imaginary assets." He gestured toward Caroline, who rose and introduced a man in his 40s wearing a cheap suit. "This is Mr. Green, a former nurse's aide. He will testify that Margaret was not of sound mind in her last year and often rambled about imaginary fortunes." My jaw tightened as the man took the stand, speaking about confusion and incoherent mutterings. Daniel leaned close to me and whispered, "Stay calm. We will dismantle this." When Naomi was called forward, Richard's questions were pointed and cruel. "Professor Green, is it not true that you are related to Evelyn? That your support is biased?" Naomi sat tall, her glasses catching the light. "Yes, I am her cousin, but my expertise is not biased. The crest in the journal is a verified symbol of a European lineage that settled here. The documentation matches archival records. Facts do not change because of relation." Richard pressed harder, his voice rising. "But you cannot prove this crest connects directly to Margaret Hale." Naomi held steady. "Actually, I can. Historical records tie the family's arrival to Portland in 1947. The trust mentioned in the journal corresponds to that timeline. It is not speculation. It is documented history." When she stepped down, Daniel rose smoothly. He began by presenting the certified DNA results. "This shows Evelyn as the direct maternal heir of Margaret Hale, which is crucial under the language of the trust." He placed a thick folder on the judge's desk. "Here are chain of title documents tracing property ownership from the 1947 trust to present day. Here is a notarized affidavit with scans of the journal, along with handwriting analysis confirming it was authored by Margaret Hale. All documents were filed under proper chain of custody. The original journal was stolen, but evidence had already been secured." The judge leafed through the papers, nodding slightly. Richard shot up again, his face flushed. "Your Honor, the original journal is missing. That alone makes this claim questionable." Daniel stepped forward. "That journal was taken in a break-in at Evelyn's bookstore, which is under police investigation. The timing of the theft coincides with threats from the opposing party. I remind the court that chain of custody ensures admissibility of the evidence." The judge's gaze turned to Richard. "Mr. Marlowe, were you or your associates in possession of the journal at any point?" Richard shifted uncomfortably. "Of course not." "Then, how do you explain knowledge of its contents before the scans were public?" the judge pressed. For the first time, Richard faltered. His words tangled and his eyes darted toward Caroline. She looked away, her lips pressed tight. Daniel seized the moment. "Your Honor, what we see here is a coordinated attempt to discredit Evelyn through intimidation and possible tampering. Yet the facts remain intact. The trust exists, the DNA confirms lineage, the historical crest connects directly, and the handwriting matches Margaret Hale's. The law is clear. She is the rightful beneficiary." The judge removed his glasses, setting them on the desk with deliberate care. The silence stretched long enough to make my heart hammer against my ribs. Then he spoke. "This court recognizes Evelyn Marlowe as the lawful beneficiary of the 1947 trust. The quiet title is granted for the disputed property, and the assets under this trust are confirmed in her name. Furthermore, I caution the plaintiffs. Any further attempts at harassment or frivolous filings will result in sanctions." The gavel struck, the sound sharp and final. I felt the breath leave my lungs in a rush. Richard sat frozen, his face drained of color. Caroline whispered furiously in his ear, but his eyes stayed fixed on the table. Naomi gave me a small nod of reassurance, and Daniel leaned closer. "It's over," he said softly. "You won." I looked around the courtroom, the weight of weeks and months lifting from my shoulders. For the first time, I did not feel like the quiet caregiver ignored in the corner. I felt like someone who had stood her ground, faced the storm, and come through stronger. The judge's ruling echoed in my ears as we gathered our papers. My hands no longer trembled as I packed the folder back into my bag. I straightened my jacket, lifted my head, and walked out of the courtroom into the cool Portland air, the city humming beyond the courthouse steps. Chapter 8: Legacy and Revenge. The weeks after the ruling moved quickly, though for me each day felt surreal. The papers confirmed the property and assets under my name, and Daniel handled the last filings with steady precision. Naomi visited often, bringing copies of articles and records that supported what the court had already decided. Emily Sanders appeared again, not at my store this time, but with a request for an interview. "I want to tell your story the right way," she said, setting her recorder gently on the table between us. I hesitated. I don't want it to sound like revenge. She smiled. It won't. People should hear how you chose to honor your grandmother. This isn't about spite. It's about legacy. When her article appeared in the Portland Chronicle, the headline read, "Local bookstore owner builds scholarship fund from historic trust." The story painted me not as the black sheep of the family, but as someone who took pain and turned it into something enduring. Messages poured in, strangers thanking me for reminding them that compassion mattered more than inheritance battles. The scholarship fund was set up within months. I named it the Margaret Hale Foundation, dedicated to helping first-generation college students in Oregon. The day of the opening ceremony arrived bright and clear, with banners fluttering outside a small hall at Portland State University. The room filled with students, faculty, community leaders, and reporters. I stood at the podium, the microphone trembling slightly under my hand, and looked out at the faces gathered there. My grandmother taught me more than books ever could, I said. She taught me that strength comes quietly, through love and persistence. Today, this fund carries her name, not as a symbol of wealth, but as a promise to those who will build their own futures. Applause rose, warm and genuine, and in that sound, I felt the weight I had carried finally ease. After the ceremony, Barbara approached me slowly, her expression softer than I had seen in years. She reached for my hand. "I was wrong," she whispered. "I should have stood by you. I should have stood by her." Tears stung my eyes. "She forgave you long before today." "I think she just wanted us to learn." We stood together in silence, the noise of the crowd fading around us. For the first time, I felt a thread of peace between us. In the months that followed, news of my relatives trickled back to me. Richard faced disciplinary review at his firm after the court record revealed his reckless conduct. Caroline's boutique folded under debt, her social media accounts going silent. Thomas lost his managerial post after conflicts of interest came to light, the very arrogance that once kept him untouchable now his undoing. None of it brought me joy, but I could not deny the symmetry. They had each chosen their path, and the consequences were theirs to carry. At night in the bookstore, when the lights were low and the city outside hummed softly, I sometimes opened the scanned copy of Margaret's journal. My eyes always drifted to one line she had underlined with deliberate care. "Trust what you see." I carried those words into every choice I made, and they guided me more than any victory in court ever could. The final moment of closure came when I returned to the property the trust had secured decades before. The land stretched wide with tall grass moving in the wind, the kind of place Margaret would have walked as a girl. Standing there, I closed my eyes and heard her voice again, quiet but certain. "Do not believe what they say. Trust what you see." I smiled through tears, the ache in my chest easing into something steadier. She had left me more than a legacy of wealth. She had left me courage. She had left me a compass. If you have ever been dismissed or looked down on by those closest to you, if you have ever been told you were small or unworthy, remember this. Sometimes the deepest act of revenge is not to destroy, but to rise above and build something lasting. Sometimes the most powerful justice is found in creating a legacy that outlives their cruelty. And sometimes the best way to answer those who doubted you is to become exactly what they said you could never be. So tell me, have you ever been underestimated and turned it into strength? What would your legacy look like if you chose to build instead of break? Share your thoughts with me, because together we can prove that the truest revenge is not in hate, but in the lives we choose to create.